If you don't mind, I'd like to hop over you as you are but an observer and take it to Mark and NERC first, and then hear how you feel about it as you're allowed to, given the constraints that you operate under. So, Mark, would you like to say a few words from the NERC point of view?
Well, for something completely different, I understood when I got here that this is a slide-free presentation. So imagine, if you will, some of the things I'll be chatting a little bit about. You all know what NERC is, so I don't really have to go through that. And the area that I focus in on is more putting your binoculars on and looking to the future. And why are we interested in the smart grid and the reliability implications? Those people that know me know that I'm pretty much a positive, optimistic, upbeat guy, but most reliability folks and power system people and operators tend to have to look at the glass half empty, not half full. In other words, what could happen if? And so those of you who read the NERC report on the smart grid, please remember that that's what the vein of the report is. We didn't spend a lot of time saying what all the wonderful things that smart grid can do. That's a given. But what we were concerned about is what could happen if we don't do it right, and if we're not successful in doing it right. So NERC does a risk comparison of different subjects, emerging issues that industry is facing, and identified integration of smart grid technologies as one of those that led to some concern. It was right there along with cybersecurity. Planners, power system planners and operators don't understand it very well. And of course, it certainly, you probably are aware that it does get some notice from regulators and legislators. So it was an area that we decided to embark on. And we were quite heartened by the number of experts that we were able to gather on the Smart Grid Task Force, well over 100 folks, and they broke this into a number of different pieces. One looking at the characteristics of smart grid and how you model this stuff. What are the impacts then on how we plan the system? What are the impacts to the operations of the system? And also then there was a cyber component that we also dealt in quite deeply, which again, you can look at the report. One thing that we found when we opened up the lid on this, and you mentioned that I, along with my main job of restoring mid-century modern furniture, is to also work at NERC. I also worked at EPRI, and I was involved with the IntelliGrid activity, and so everybody that I worked with, we kind of knew what the definition of smart grid was. And we found that many CEOs just kind of went blank when you ask them, well, what's a smart grid? Well, it's something like that. And in fact, everything that we talk about that we can do with the smart grid, we can do now. It's not as really as nice as it should be and could be. You can have demand response. You can integrate variable generation. You can have great number of diagnostics, but you just have to have all these conversion boxes and all this maintenance and the plug and play you got to buy from one vendor, and on it goes. So, clearly there's some abilities there, and we found that everybody pretty much had a different vision of what the smart grid was, and you got all these different pictures and everything else. The bottom line is we wanted to approach it from the reliability perspective, and we decided that the smart grid is not going to be smart unless it's secure and reliable. If it's not that, then it's not smart, it's just me, Of course, I could talk to my wife about that. So we added that to the definition of smart grid, along with the two-way flow of communication and energy, et cetera. So I'm going to look at my slides. So they got me this new iPad thing here. And other than the fact that my fingers are too thick, it's pretty good stuff.
If we could see that slide, it might help us have a better understanding for what you're trying to describe.
Yeah, I would have been pleased. Close your eyes,
nice,
if you will, and think of. We did see a lot of smartness in smart technologies already out there. You'll run into this conversation with large industry folks who will say, well, we already got a smart grid. It's already smart. Well, they got islands of smart technology, so we kind of drifted into smart technology and smart systems, and we did see these kind of column functional, which actually was in integrated utilities, but even exacerbated with the current industry structure of distribution, transmission, and generation. And so the task force really took under its wing, as I mentioned, really looking at the bulk power system implications. That's where NERC plays. That's our reason for being. We can't get into the distribution system. Now, where that starts, we'll leave it to our colleagues over at FERC. Obviously, we're studying where that starts and ends and where we get technical feasibilities and all that. So the report that really addressed the different characteristics tried to look at it from the way in which planners look at things and operators look at things, because those are the ones in the end that are going to have to plan a system that will be more reliable and more secure. And if they're going to spend the money one way or the other, and it can give you a more secure system, well, then all the better. Do it right up front. And then the tools that operators are going to need when, in fact, they have to deal with cyber issues. Well, I got these wonderful slides. These are great. You guys really should see it.
Just hold it up.
Yeah.
Hold it up, and
Yeah,
so we
right.
can see it.
I wish I could go.
At least let Jason see it.
So the report has, you know, the legislative and regulatory summary, of course, characteristics and technology assessment, the planning and operations, the cybersecurity, where we address some of the elements that my colleague just did around risk assessment. They did a tremendous job, the task force, over identifying how to manage risk, and it was beyond. You could pick that up and use it today. You could pick it up and use it on many different elements. How to manage the risk to your reliability or your security, and where are you today, and what kind of risk profile do you want for the future. Now, at NERC, of course, we tend to see things with at least a minimum standard. What that will be ultimately is something that industry will work with us to attain. But right now we're dealing with a lot of amorphous and intangibles, and a lot of it has to do with just information flow. We don't have enough information to determine exactly what we're facing. The results of the task force indicated that, you know, that there were some actually key observations for successful integration. One is that government initiatives or regulations promoting smart grid integration should consider reliability. We wanted to make sure, we always got to say that, because that's just the reason why we're alive. It also requires new tools and to support planning and operations, and that it will change the characteristic of the distribution system. That's important when you look at dynamic stability. Also important when the bulk of your resources start coming from the distribution system, what visibility the operator is going to have to that distribution system, what vulnerabilities does it set up, both in cyber, but also there's some dynamics there that you got to worry about. This is a large nonlinear system. There's a lot of steam and energy behind it, and it's not DC yet anyway, unless we have a geomagnetic storm or something. Anyway, so it will also cyber security and control systems will require enhancement to ensure reliability, and then there's some substantial research and development required to help support a lot of those things I just mentioned. So the recommendations included, you know, ensuring that we increase our coordination with Canada. I know that NIST is reaching out. We're going to try to facilitate that. Monitor the developments and remain engaged, of course. Support development of tools and technology. That's what NERC's going to be doing, and enhance the standards as they're needed. I think it really was important is there were 4 specific recommendations in the work plan. One is to look at the existing models that we use to plan the bulk power system and identify how we model cyber impacts. We generally, you know, simulate the system with, you know, single line to ground fault with a stuck breaker, and that's an umbrella for a lot of other things like a single line to ground, you know, single line to ground fault, or a stuck breaker, or a failed breaker of some sort. So we have these umbrella tests that we run the system through, and we say, once you get done with that, then you hand it to the operator and let them complain about it. But there's always these battles between operators and planners. The planners don't know what the operators do, and the operators know that whatever the planners do, it's wrong. But we don't have tests for a failure to the system from a cyber attack. and how strong, what is going to be the adequate level of reliability, you might say, from a, so that the system will just, gracefully end up, I think this was, I've read it in our HILF report, gracefully degrade to a reliable state. So when the operator is shutting off systems because there's a cyber attack and they've been able to recognize it, we're still reliable, we're still controllable. We won't be positioned to have uncontrolled cascading the bulk power system. So develop those models for the planners. Also develop models of the distribution system and the attack vectors, as well as the control requirements and the ability to control on the distribution system. NERC doesn't play there, but in as much as the changes there could affect bulk power system reliability, we need to be able to model it. So those two groups are going off to work on that. There's the harmony piece where we're going to make sure we have at least a barbershop choir with the Canadians, but also potentially the Mexicans too, who are a small bit of them are part of NERC. And then finally, the cyber piece. And I call it the cyber piece in my mind. But that's really where we take the work that was done in the Smart Grid report and now start developing metrics to measure where we are today and then where we want to go.
He said metrics.
Metrics? Yes. Metric, yeah. That's an important thing. See, we don't always have the data for it yet, and that's something we're going to have to drill down on.
There's no coaching.
Exactly where are we today? Relative reliability and give senior management, planners, operators a feeling of where we are, and then also then when we plan the system, if we do something and it drives the risk down, we can measure that, and then we can also then backtrack on that. There's also a host of tools that operators are going to need to be able to be aware of different attack vectors so they can take the operational actions that they're going to need to take. All of this, of course, will support the smart grid. That being said, even without the smart grid, take a deep breath, we still have an issue here and with cybersecurity. And therefore, I think a lot of the things we're talking about, especially around the cyber piece, is something that is going to be valuable to industry and going forward. So
thanks a lot. If you don't mind, I'm cognizant as moderator.
We run out of time.
I have different responsibilities. One is to have everyone say their piece, and the other one is to have everyone say their piece.
I'm done. I just said my piece.
Are you sure? Because
yeah.
I don't want to.
That's it. I'm done.
I want to do this in a
my slides
suave,
I don't have any more,
way.
I have no more slides.
So he ran out of slides. So Jason, yes, we are past the halfway point, and you have yet to utter hardly a peep. So
I'm just observing.
Start peeping. And let me remind the
you
group.
didn't say that about me, did you?
The topic that we are here discussing today is the Risk Management Process Initiative, where these organizations who don't necessarily always collaborate closely on things are collaborating on this, on risk management in the smart grid scenario. So what are your observations?
Well, I would actually say that for the three organizations that are up here, we do work very closely, and we historically have. Just for a little history lesson, and also I always have to start this off by saying that I don't speak on behalf of the commission. Right. Anybody who works who's worked with FERC before knows that that's every other word I say ends in that sentence. But for this purposes here, DOE and FERC actually came out of the same organization, the Federal Power Commission, back in the 1970s. That was separated out. It's absolutely correct in saying that we're independent. I don't report to the president. I don't report to OMB. Don't report to DOE. We're an independent agency. There are some, miscellaneous reporting requirements here and there, but we don't do the research. We don't develop the standards. So then that leads, where is our authority? We are there to certify the ERO, which is NERC, and to approve or remand, suggest modifications to the reliability, in this case, we're talking about cybersecurity standards. So when I'm looking at cybersecurity in particular, looking at that piece of the authority, and I'll get to the other ESA stuff that I'm sure everybody else wants to talk about as well. How many people here, everybody here knows about the SIPs, how many people here, though, have actually read the source material being Order 706 that came out of the commission? All right, that's actually a lot more hands than I would have expected.
What do you mean by read?
Well, because we're having some discussions during these past few days. One of the things that came up yesterday was talking about pen testing, how pen testing can, be used with the SIPs. Well, there's actually a good 2-page discussion in Order 706 where we say the Commission's goal is to get to live vulnerability testing. That's something that you can actually look up. I carry an annotated version of 706 on me at all times. If somebody wants to pull up the quote, I can. That's something that you can actually say. The Commission has stated that. That's a Commission quote. We've talked about defense in depth in 706. We've talked about, multi-factor authentication. So these are things that, independent of what we see in the SIPs, now granted you are going to be audited for the SIPs, not for what we said in 706, but you at least know what the Commission has already looked at and what the Commission is thinking. All of that is based off public comment, as Annabelle said. It's actually really nice to speak after Annabelle and Mike Asante because most of what I would say has already been said today. We base our determinations on what the public says. So if there's an order out there that has come up from FERC and you don't agree with it, you have the opportunity to comment on it. And if your organization has commented on it and you don't necessarily agree with your organization, I'll let you decide on how you want to manage that. But we do get a lot of comments on security, smart grid security. We released a policy statement on the Energy Independence and Security Act legislation that gave us the ability to adopt smart grid interoperability standards. Annabelle read out the entire quote this morning. That we had about 70 comments on. I imagine that a lot of people might have had some more comments on that. I'm not sure. So when I'm looking at the technical conference that we just had on January 31st, I really urge people to comment more on it if they have concerns, because that's what I'm going to be basing my actions on. Now with NERC, obviously I'm an observer. I do not lead anything at NERC. I do not tell NERC what to do. There are directives that are given out, like in 706, to look at modifications for the SIP standards in particular. But we coordinate. We're in different meetings. Granted, if it's an audit or investigation, FERC takes a more active role, obviously. But for the most part, it's really kind of a waiting to see what it is that industry's doing, what it is that industry wants the regulator to do. That's where your comment period comes in. And as Bill said also, we're observing the risk management process that's being put in place because we are an independent organization. It may not be in an appropriate role for us to kind of deep dive into that.
Okay, thanks.